It's time to start working on a motor for my Colt. As you're probably aware, I'm working on a Colt 250 single cylinder as a backup sled to the Skedaddler for some one-lung racing. Um, Sled I built years ago and sold it. I bought it back. It came back with the blown up motor. You're wondering, well, why the Colt? Well, first off, I've already built the sled. It's done. I like the build a lot. We're somewhat replicating that build on Lonnie's sled, although Lonnie decided to go cleated. That's neither here nor there. And then you're probably wondering, why this motor? Let's face it, there's a lot of bigger, stronger, more powerful motors out there. The Sox 340SS, Sox 340C, Hurt 194R, that's a 340. Yeah, those are all awesome motors and they make way more power than this. But where are you going to find one and what are you going to pay for it? Where do you get pistons? Where do you get parts? Yada, yada, yada. Even the R295 in the Skedaddler, which is right behind the camera, that's what I keep pointing at. Even the R295 makes way more power than this. I don't have any firm power numbers on this. I've been told maybe 20 horsepower. But why this sled? Well, for one thing, I can get pistons for it. I went on eBay and I bought stock SPI pistons and I bought some no-name white box 20 over pistons for it, specifically for this or for the early to mid 70s 488 Polarises. So 244 is half of a 488. We'll talk more on 488s in a minute though. So I can get parts for this. I can get gasket sets. I can get pistons. It's got a cast iron bore. It can be overbored if it needs to. It's got this, a Mikuni carb. A Mikuni carb, in my opinion, is a great advantage. I really like them. The other thing is, where's that clutch? So you can run the Polaris closed face aluminum clutch on the Colt 250 in the HR class. This thing fits in the HR class, which is the low horsepower class. If you use any of those big name, big motors like the 340SS Sox, you're up in the HD class. So I can run this little guy. It's on the small size, but it fits the sled. It bolts in. I can get parts. I've got what I feel is the best clutch you could get in the era and the best carb you could get in the era. It doesn't have CDI. It's still points, but it fits totally within the rules. And to me, that's worth it. The Skedaddler, if I run that, that's in the HD class. I got to run against the faster guys. I mean, we're all running out there on the course at the same time anyways. But, might as well go for the possibly easier class. I don't know. I've seen some really, really fast HR class sleds too. So I'm not sure that it's advantage other than it fits in a class very nicely. Basically, specifically, that's the class they allow you to run this in. All right, beer break. We'll come back and talk about some other stuff. So I've been asked some questions about this sled, specifically because it's a 244cc. So is the old Trail Boss 250 ATV. And obviously a 244 is half a 488 like an Indy Trail. So let's talk about that quick, right? Here's the ATV cylinder. It's a free air, and the head is huge like the cylinder. You're obviously not going to use that in a stock class sled. And the porting's different, as far as I know. It looks way different. For one thing, the intake's got a bridged intake, and this one has a non-bridged intake. So I haven't like traced out the ports yet, but I think it's different. Now the 488 Indy Trail, the porting is radically different, and so is the cylinder. So if I show you right here, you can see how big the transfer ports are on that. And you can see that they're not on this 244 cylinder. They're nowhere near that big. And as I peek in, it's pretty obvious. The exhaust port's smaller. This is just a more mildly ported cylinder. It's definitely meant for a lower RPM. So can you put the 488 cylinder on in stock class? Well, no. No, and if you do, are you going to get caught? Well, really easily. I mean, anybody can peek down between your clutch and the cylinder and really easily spot those intake ports, or I mean those transfer ports. I mean, it's so different. So, can you build a more sporty, faster 244 single with the 488 cylinder? Absolutely. But you're not legal for stock class, and when you get teched, if you win a race, you'll be DQ'd. So if you do that, you should probably just be honest and go right into the mod class, because that's where that puts you. And yep, it'll make more power and it'll be a faster sled, but you'll be in the higher class against other sleds. And speaking of mod class, what about this ATV cylinder? Well, let me show you another 244 that I built quite a while ago. So I was asked in the comments, what about an ATV Topend on a 244? Well, that's what you're looking at there. This is a motor I built several years ago for Tommy and I to race up at Brapfest. It's a Star 244 bottom end, and the reason I chose the Star was because it had oil injection and it was a CDI motor instead of points. To get the cylinder to bolt up, I had to move the holes in the base of the cylinder to line up with the sled studs in the crankcase. And then I set about porting, and I ported and I ported and I ported. Designed a custom pipe that you can see in this picture. This motor was made to run at 8,500 RPM, which is considerably faster than either the ATV or the Star were ever meant to run. It did real good. It was completely reliable. It was a great motor. But I just wanted to give you that answer about the compatibility of the ATV stuff. Now, can you put an ATV head on a 244 Colt? You can, but you won't get your fan shroud on. The studs bolt up. They're the same pattern, but I don't know why you'd do it if you're leaving it a fan motor. If you put that on, now all of a sudden you're in mod class, and you might as well build a real mod motor, not just put an ATV head on a 488 Indy Trail cylinder. All right, so back to show and tell at the desk. By the way, I still have that sled and that motor just as raced. It's just up on a shelf, and it's dark where it is. That's why I didn't go back and film it live. It's just not real accessible. Anyways, so back to show and tell. So we've talked about this ATV cylinder, and yeah, I mean, these are the holes I mentioned they're just in the wrong spot. You have to move them. But otherwise, yeah, you can make it work. It does have a really small carb flange. We did some welding on it and adapted it so that I could put a 38 millimeter carb on it. And like I mentioned, heavily ported because it needed it to spin the RPMs I wanted. So we'll put that aside. So another item to point out, aside from the obvious external stuff that's a dead giveaway, right? The angles of the bolts, the transfer ports. These ports are longer, 6 millimeters longer here than here. So if you do decide you're going to build a mod motor with a 488 Indy Trail cylinder, you are going to have to port the cases. And things are probably going to get pretty thin. But go ahead and do it, but make sure you port match to the 488 Indy Trail base gasket if you're going to do that. Okay, we got to touch on pistons quick. The short answer to what piston you should use is use the stock piston for your motor. And if you're going to switch cylinders, use the piston that matches your cylinder. These pistons are all different. There's good reasons for it. I'm not going to attempt to detail it. But trust me, if two pistons were identical, the smart people at the piston manufacturers, why, they would have figured that out and said they're the same part number in the catalog. So that's about it. Use the stock piston. Huge shout out to everybody that leaves me nice comments. So I'm answering a comment/question from Dirty Face George. George, I really appreciate you. George wants to know, what if I had one of these Colts with a 250 single, a 244, and I put on a pipe from a Trail Boss? I don't have any hard data. I don't own a dyno, but my guess is you get similar gains. They're the same bore and stroke. They make about the same horsepower at about the same RPM. So I would expect the port timing is about the same. So I'd expect to get about the same gains. Now, I really got to ask why you would do that. Personally, I would never do that. If it was a trail ride sled, I'd go right up to a twin, at least a 340. You know, that was pretty common in Colts. If I was one lung racing in mod class, there's no way. In my opinion, that motor, assuming stock port timing and the head's not cut and nothing crazy's been done, in my opinion, that motor just makes about the same horsepower as the top of the HD class. Maybe a little more, but not a lot. And, you know, the mod class is just going up from there. So I don't think you'd be competitive in the mod class. So my opinion is if you have one of these 244 fan motors and a Colt and you're allowed to run in the HR class, that's your place. That's your best bet. So hope you guys can appreciate that. So I hope you appreciated this video about the old 244 fan-cooled single, aka the Colt 250 single. It is what it is. You know, it should be reliable, but it's not the ultimate horsepower motor. We're just going out to have fun. And if we place, great. But if we don't, as long as we had fun, it's all good. So with that said, we want to say a huge thanks to the patrons. You guys are the best. Take a look up here at these names. These are our patrons, and they donate every month, and they feed the beer and pizza fund, maybe even a little bit of the parts fund on occasion, and we really appreciate them. The patrons are the biggest supporters of the channel. Now, everybody else, if you support the channel and you haven't subscribed yet, hit subscribe, and grab your wife's phone and subscribe her too. Anyways, we'll see you on the trails.